Birdman. I have trouble narrowing down my favorite movies, so when people ask me, I usually instead opt to try to explain what I look for in a movie, what I like. I always need real, fleshed out, three-dimensional characters, and I appreciate great dialogue and great performances. I want interesting cinematography, and honestly, I've always been a sucker for long takes. I find that I enjoy black comedies for sure. Dark humor, comedies with high stakes. Oh, and sometimes I like it when there are some surrealist elements thrown in there. It's not always easy to pull off, but when it's done right... And man, if a movie can manage to be relevant, to reflect the world around it, to take a snapshot of the culture from whence it came, steals my heart. Clearly, I'm building up to something here. I'm building up to how much I frickin' loved Birdman. Regan Thompson, played by Michael Keaton, is a washed-up Hollywood actor whose biggest claim to fame is starring in the fictional 80s superhero franchise Birdman. He's trying to regain the spotlight, but also gain some artistic integrity and critical respect by adapting a Raymond Carver short story into a Broadway play.
You wrote this adaptation?
I did, yeah.
And you're directing and starring in your adaptation. That's ambitious.
And overall, it just seems that Regan isn't good enough to pull this off. He's not a good enough actor to handle the material. He's not a good enough director to handle his cast. He's not a good enough producer to keep the play out of the red. He has to deal with an asinine but wickedly talented co-star in Mike Shiner, played by Edward Norton. He has to babysit his resentful and fresh out of rehab daughter, played by Emma Stone. And he has to constantly reassure his neurotic lawyer, played by Zach Galifianakis, and a role that Paul Giamatti would normally play, that this play will be a success. And on top of all this, he's being haunted and constantly criticized by this lingering and persistent voice in his head, the raspy voice of his Birdman character. So 95% of this movie is edited together to look like one continuous shot, which is astounding. And almost all of the movie takes place in one building, a theater with dark, narrow hallways. This creates such a claustrophobic environment, and there are no cuts of the camera to take the pressure off the audience, and there are no wide open spaces to take the pressure off the audience. Minus one very intentional scene. Also, the score of the movie is just a single rhythmic, offbeat jazz drumming, which, along with the constant mobility of the camera, creates a manic hurriedness. And how appropriate that this movie has both hurriedness and an element of taking place in real time. It's about a theater production. In an interview with Variety, director Alejandro Iñárritu said that his motivations for making it one continuous shot were because, and I quote, "we live our lives with no editing." And because this way he could submerge the protagonist in an inescapable reality and take the audience with him. Dude.
You just wrinkled my brain, man.
This immersive, inescapable reality that Iñárritu has created is filled with an all-star cast of crazy good characters. There's a reason this movie got 3 acting nominations and won the SAG Award for Best Cast. Every single actor disappears into their character, especially Emma Stone. Every character has a point of view, and no one is just a warm body taking up space. The camera could have followed around any one character, and it actually does follow most of them for at least a bit, and it still would have made for an interesting movie. That's incredible for a cast of this size. But the camera mostly follows around Regan, and Regan is a walking contradiction. He hates himself, seriously hates himself, and yet he's completely self-centered, always thinking of himself and putting himself before others. He thinks he's better than other people, above them, and yet he's constantly defining his own self-worth by what they think of him. One of the first things you see in his dressing room, prominently displayed, are the words, "A thing is a thing, not what is said of that thing." And yet he so clearly believes the opposite of that, hence the play. He wants to be a respected stage actor, a real artist, like Mike Shiner. But he effing hates Mike Shiner. Michael Keaton captures these contradictions in what I think is easily the best performance of the year. I imagine it's not easy to play a mediocre actor trying to be a good actor, but he does so with so much range. Hope, frustration, panic, much of it internalized. Trying to hold his own in scenes with Mike Shiner. Hating him as a person, admiring him as an actor, and envying him for being a respected artist. Trying to face his daughter, who he has so clearly let down, as she consistently pushes him away. Trying to ignore the voice in his head, but secretly believing what it's saying. You can see all these things in the subtle nuances of Keaton's reactions. The overall themes of the story are familiar. Man feels his own mortality, or irrelevance, but they're often the same thing. So he tries to do one last gesture to accomplish something, or leave a legacy, or make a comeback, or matter. For more on this, see The Wrestler, Up in the Air, Death of the Salesman, Synecdoche, New York, Sunset Boulevard, and others. But the reason this is familiar is because it works. It taps into the human condition and creates a story out of our collective biggest fears. That our lives are steeped in meaninglessness and we're going to die alone and be forgotten. The basis of a story is protagonist wants X and faces consequences Y if he or she fails to get it. What higher stakes can you get? Protagonist wants greatness/relevance/meaning, and faces dying quietly alone and being forgotten by the world as if he never existed. I think that's something we can all relate to. Speaking of relatable, because the timing of this movie coincides with the announcement of superhero movies out to 2028, you have to wonder if any of these guys will be desperately trying to put on a Broadway play in 30 years. Even if none of them do, something tells me Birdman will still be relevant in 30 years.